this is now the daf only for Monday. I only know that there's a prohibition. I only know that there's a prohibition of lending money to the borrower, meaning to say, I only know that you're not allowed to borrow money at interest. How do I know that also you can't lend money at interest? Never neshach b'lova, never neshach b'malva. We know that there's a prohibition for the borrower and there's a prohibition for the lender. Ma neshach hamor b'lovo v'chilaktu ben gazav ben ochel. Just like the prohibition for the borrower, there's no distinction between money and food. Ben beneshach ben beribis. Av neshach hamor b'malva. So too by the lender, lo tichot bo ben b'kasef ben b'ochel. So too by the lender, there's no distinction between money and food. Ben beneshach ben beribis. So Minay and Rabba is called over. How do I know that the prohibition of interest doesn't apply just to money and food, but to anything? The Amoramer Neshach called over Asher Yishach. So it's a pasuk. Ravina says, "Lo Neshach ba'ochav ribis begesef tzrichakra." Ravina says, "No, we don't need an extra verse to teach us the prohibition by food and the prohibition by money." Because if it would say your money you can't give him by Neshach va'achlecha. And if you would read the pasuk that says, "As then I would say kedika amris. Then I would say, just like you said, the neshach refers to money and marbis to food. But now the pasuk says, "As so therefore, so therefore, you have to read this pasuk as follows. It's very obvious. As that it's obviously the case that the pasuk refers to both food and money. Zimar says, but this is an amora. That Ravina is an amora. And he's at the end of the generations of Amorayim. But we had cited a brisa which says that it's a gzera shava. So why is the Amora challenging this verse that the brisa had cited? So the Gemara says hachikamar. So this is what it means. If there was no pasuk, hayiti omer gzera shava. I would say that it's based upon a verse. But achshav shenemar kra. So now that we have a specific verse telling us that neshach and marbis applies to food and money, so now what do we do with the gzera shava? Gzera shava lo tzarach. We don't need this gzera shava that the Bryce had cited. El gzera shava lamoli. So why do we have a gzera shava? L'nashach kol davar asher yishach. So it's to tell us the low cost of a malva. It's to tell us that everything applies to interest, and the Torah didn't say this about a lender. And we're saying now that it applies to everything. So I'm a Rava, Lamali the cost of Rahmana, Lav Berivis, Lav Begezo, Lav Bona. So Rava asked the following question: why does the Torah need to tell us a prohibition by interest? There's a specific prohibition by robbery and a specific prohibition by ona, by price fraud. Why do we need three separate prohibitions? So Mar explained, if it just said the prohibition by rivis, Misham the Chidushu, because interest is a chiddush. It's an unusual law. It's a novel law. It's not just a prohibition for the lender. Even the borrower has a prohibition to borrow money and interest. Because the Rahman alav begezel. And if the Torah just said it by robbery, mishum de bal korche, because robbery happens against the person's will. So therefore it's prohibited. But maybe the person, it's not against his will. He's willingly getting involved in it. Because of Rahman al-Abona, and if the door just said it by the fraud, he doesn't know what's going on, and he's not waiving his rights. But by interest and robbery, he knows what's going on. He's aware of it. So we can't learn out one from the other one, but teisi chadam itarti. We'll learn out one from the other two. So hi teisi, which ones would you learn out? Well, Rahman al-Abba Torah shouldn't write the prohibition by interest, and he should learn out the interest prohibition from the other two. So the Gemara says, but you can't learn out from the interest from robbery and onah. Shekain shalom midas, they happen without his consent or without his knowledge. Tomar Baribis, how are you going to say by interest? The midaite. It's also prohibited by interest, even with knowledge. So the Torah shouldn't write it by ona, by fraud, and let him learn it out from ribis and robbery. No, no, ona is different because the other ones are not normal business, normal ways of doing business. So Torah should not write it by robbery. And we're not robbery from ona and interest. Demai parachta, because what was your question? Mala ribis shekina chidush. Because you said ribis is a chiddush, ona tochiach. Ona can prove, because ona is also a chiddush. So what was your question that ona would say is not a chiddush, and so therefore, and so therefore we can't learn out from ona. So, but we can't learn out from ona because he waives his right. So ribis tochiach. So the ribis should prove it. So neither one by itself could prove it. What's the tzad of shavash? What's the common denominator? Shekain goes. The common denominator is that you're basically taking something from somebody that doesn't belong to you. Afani gezel, so I'll bring out robbery, and it also doesn't belong to him. So therefore, we didn't need a specific prohibition from the Torah about robbery because we could have learned it out by combining the prohibitions of gezel and unah. So therefore, what's the reason why the Torah has to write the prohibition against robbery? Elav gezel amrli. It's to tell us that the prohibition of robbery is to tell us that you can't be late paying somebody whom you owe money to. Where it says kovesh schar sachir behedjik siveit. No, there's a specific verse telling us that you can't be late. Ksivei lo tashok sachir aniv evyon. It says in the pasuk, you're not allowed to delay the payment to a worker. So Gemara says, okay, so we need two prohibitions. We want to say that if you delay payment to a worker, you're in violation of two prohibitions. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, once we're just saying two prohibitions, look maybe ribis v'ona. Well, why don't we just say that this prohibition of do not steal applies to ribis or ona, interest or fraud, and they're in violation of two prohibitions. Gemara says, davar alamid minyano. No, because the context of that verse is referring to theft and not paying a worker. Ibinyana the sachir ksiv, and it's written when it says "do not steal." It's written in the context of not paying a worker. It says "lo tignovu." It says "lo tashok es re'echa v'lo tigzol." Do not pay your friend and do not steal. So we're on top of 61 base. So now we have actually some verses that relate to Pesach. So it says, because of Rahman al-Amoy. The Gemara says, when it says, if do not rob, do not steal, well, why does Torah need to say it? Look at the Tanya, meaning to say, why does it need to say this prohibition of Votignovo when we could have just learned it out from the prohibition of Ribis and Ona? So he says the reason why it says it is that you're not going to take, even if your intention is not to really steal, but just to hurt the other person, like annoy him. Don't, you know how to steal if you say, don't worry, I'll steal, I'll pay back double. You still know how to do that. Why does the Torah say a prohibition by weights? Why does the Torah have to say that there's a prohibition to put in a false weights? Isn't that within the prohibition of theft? That is to tell you can't weigh down your weights with salt. You can't use salt as a way of tricking the person with your weights. Exactly how they did it that way is a debate, but you know how to do it. And Mar says, well, that's Hainu Gezel Ma'alya, that's actual theft. So no, you're not allowed to manipulate the weights from the moment you manipulate the weights even before you actually steal, you've violated the prohibition. What about the fact that it says you're not allowed to do falsehood with judgment? With a measurement, with weights, and with mesura. Mesura is a liquid measure. B'mida zu medidas karka. You're not allowed to use false measures when you measure the land. You can't measure with the same rope in the winter and the summer because the rope is different. The mishkal, what does it mean with weights? You're not allowed to weigh down the weights with salt or manipulate the weights with salt. You're not allowed to sell the person the liquid, but you're gonna also try to sell them the foam at the top, which is deceptive. And it's a logical argument. Mishloshim belug. And a masura, which is a very small amount, is 1/30th of a lug. Ikpidol of Torah. The Torah says you have to be careful not to sell them the froth. For sure, for sure, for these larger measurements, you have to. For sure, for these larger measurements, you have to basically be careful not to steal with them. Why, when it talks about Egypt, does it mention the prohibition against interest? And Yetzias Mitzrayim Gabe Tzitzis, and Yetzias Mitzrayim B'Mishkalos. Why does the Torah mention the Exodus with respect to tzitzis and the Exodus with respect to weights? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem says, "Anihu shevchanti b'Mitzrayim b'tipa shavachor u'tipa she'ena shavachor." I'm the one who drew a distinction in Egypt between a drop of a firstborn and a drop that was not a firstborn. Anihu she'asid lipare mimi shetoa ma'osav benachri u'malva osam Yisrael b'ribis. I can also distinguish somebody who tries to manipulate the system by lending the money by saying it was a non-Jews and then lending it to a Jew with interest. They try to do legal fiction. I'm the one who can catch you. Somebody who's trying to deceive you with the weights and measures, and somebody who's trying to deceive the halacha by saying it's tchelas, but it's really just blue dye from a plant, and not actual tchelas from a fish. Ravina Iko Asura de Pras. Ravina came to Surah de Pras. Rav Chanina Misura de Pras Ravina. He says, Yitzias Mitzrayim the Kasa of Rahman and Gabi Shratzim normally. Why, when it says in the Torah that you're not allowed to eat these disgusting creatures, does it say in reference to the Exodus? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Aniu Shevchanti ben Tipa Shabachor or Tipa She'enu Shabachor. I'm the one who's able to distinguish between the firstborn Egyptians and the ones who aren't. Ani Asid Lipare Mimi Ma'arev Karvei Dagim Tameim Bekarvei Dagim Tarim. I'm the one who will punish those who mixes in the non-kosher fish intestines with the kosher fish. Israel. Yeah, so he says to him, yeah, but I was not bothered why it's mentioned to Egypt. I was bothered by Anna Amalek Akashli. I was bothered why instead of saying Hashar Hotzi Etzlem, it says Hashar Ha'aleh Etzlem. We took you up. That was what I was bothered by. So he says, Amalei. Why did it say the word Amala here? If the only reason I took the Jewish people out of Egypt was if the only reason I took them out of Egypt was for this reason, that you can't become tamei with shratzim, that you can't eat this non-kosher animals, that would have been sufficient. So he says, do you get more reward for not eating the non-kosher intestines than for getting than for not doing interest and for wearing tzitzis and for not having false weights? He says, even though your reward is not greater for not eating non-kosher, nevertheless, if you eat these intestines, it's disgusting. So therefore, you're going to be spiritually higher by not eating them. So the Gemara says, So the Gemara's example of what is neshech is that if you lend money for $4 and then you expect 5 back. And what's the case of Marbis? The case of Marbis that the Mishnah gave was the case of where you gave the wheat went up, and then you took back wine, which was not a fixed price. So the Gemara says, Atu kohani da amr ad hashalav. But the first example in the Mishnah was not interest. The first examples are biblical laws of interest, and the second example of the wheat and the wine was rabbinic law. The first part is the biblical law, and then it goes on to rabbinic law. The first case is an example of the Rasha will prepare and the tzaddik will reap the benefits. His righteous there will get it, but he won't. What do you mean that it's only? What do you mean up till here and not all? Meaning to say for sure. Meaning to say that by biblical interest, the son does not have to return the interest. So meaning up until here, but not by rabbinic. By rabbinic law, for sure, the son shouldn't have to return it. Meaning to say, even biblical interest, you don't have to return. The son doesn't have to return. The first cause of the Mishnah is actual interest. But afterwards, it's called avak. Avak means a dust. It's the dust of interest. It's rabbinic interest. It says actual interest you have to pay ribis ketzutza yotza b'dayanin. If it's actual interest, then the judges can make you pay it back. Avak ribis, but if it's rabbinic interest, in a yotza b'dayanin. So Rabbi Elazar says actual interest, the judges can confiscate your money, make you pay back. But rabbinic interest, you don't have to return the money. Says Rabbi Yochanan, afilu ribis ketzutza nami in a yotza b'dayanin. Even if it's rabbinic interest, you don't have to pay it back. I'm Rabbi Yitzchak, my time with Rabbi Yochanan. Why? What's Rabbi Yochanan's logic? He says it's based upon the fact that the pasuk says Damakra beneshach, because it says in the pasuk, beneshach nosan v'tarbis lakach v'chai lo yichya as kol toavosa ela asa. It says in the pasuk in Yechezkel, it says he lent money. He took a neshach, he took a bite, and he took an interest, and he lived. He will not live. One who does all these abominations. Meaning to say, if you did ribis, it's not that you don't have to pay it back. It's such a severe sin that you can't pay it back. Rabbi Barabba says, Amakra, no, it's a different pasuk. It says, do not take from him interest, you shall fear God. No, the prohibition results in you have to fear God, but you don't have to return it. Rava says, "Migufa de crush me away." No, we learned from the pasuk. It says, "Most you must damav bo." It says that one who does this, he will die. Damav bo yiyah, and his blood will be upon him. Hukshu malve ribis l'shofchei damim. One who lends an interest is compared to one who is a murderer. Just like if you kill somebody, you can't pay it back. So if you lend money and interest, you can't pay him back. Now, it seems to us that we have a hard time with this because what do you mean? Interest is not a murder, but the Talmud is saying that it's such a severe sin like that. It's like my time at Rabbi Eliezer, what's the reason for Rabbi Eliezer that you have to pay back biblical interest? Because it says in the pasuk, your brother has to live a harder way. You have to return it to him. So that he'll live. Rabbi Yochanan says, no. My other way. What does Rabbi Yochanan do with this pasuk of what does Rabbi Yochanan do with it? He learns it like the following price. There are two people walking along the road. And one of them has a jug of water. If they'll both will drink it, they'll both die. If one of them will drink it, he'll at least live. So what should you do? Darish ben Petura taught, Mutav sheyishtu shneim v'yamusu both of them should drink and die. Doesn't want to see, one of them cannot see the death of his friend. Until Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, that your brother has to live with you. That your life comes before your friend, so you drink and not your friends. Says the Gemara, Meisvei. So the Gemara is challenging Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan had said, hold on one second. So the Gemara is challenging Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan had said that if you lend money and interest, biblically or rabbinically, you don't have to return the money, or you don't return the money. But the Gemara challenges it. It says in the price, if a father lends them, if father left to his heirs money that he had lent in interest, even though they know it's interest, and he doesn't have to return the money. So if it's their father, he would have to return it, meaning the heirs don't have to return it, but the father would. Mar says, okay, the law is that really the father doesn't need to return it. But the reason why he has to return it, the reason why he uses this language, which implies that the father has to return it, is because the next clause says, that if the father leaves them a cow or a garment, something specific, they would have to return it, because they're of honor for their father. We see you have to honor your father even after he dies. So, so therefore, the first clause also, we have in the first clause the same language with respect to the children, that they would not have to return it. But why did he have to return the cow and the talus? The Gemara says, because of your father's honor. Doesn't the pasuk says you shall not curse the prince amongst your people? But that only if he acts like your people, should you not curse him? But if he doesn't act like your people, you could curse him. So the Gemara says, now, when do we say there that what's this case referring to? The reason why you have to return this cow after he dies is because he repented. And so the Gemara says, well, if he did really repented, why is the cow with him? The Gemara says, he didn't have time to return the cow before he died. He did tshuva, but he wasn't able to complete the process. The Gemara again challenges Rabbi Yochanan, who says you don't return the money that you lent in interest that you made. So it says in the Brisa, the robbers and those who lent it interest, even though they collected it, they have to return it. What does that mean? Even though they collected it, Gemara says, what does it mean? Even though they collected it, Gazlan and Karislahu. What do you mean? If he stole it, he stole it. If he didn't steal, why would we call him a robber? Ela Ema Gazlanin. So we say robbers. My meal. What are these robbers? Who are these robbers? Malve Ribis. People who have money and interest. Alpha Pisha Gavu. These robbers are people who have money and interest, and even though they collected it, Machzirin. So we see from here that that you have to return your interest. So the Gemara says Tanai. It's a machokas Tanai. Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Potrin, it's a Malva, it's a Arev, Neshiyesh ben Kumasei. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says we exempt the lender and the guarantor of the money on interest because there's a positive commandment. My Kumasei, Mishim Daminu Kuma Aduru. It says that you can return it. We call it the Tanakama Savar Avnei Aduru in it. So Rabbi Yochanan must hold like Tanakama says you don't return the money in interest. Versus no, my kuma say, what does it mean, the positive commandment? There to undo the prohibition. That you could tear up the document. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. What will tearing up the document do? If you don't want to say that a contract that's ready to be collected is like it's collected, then they already did their prohibition. But if it's not like it's collected, he's done nothing. Gemara says, it's not like it's collected. But it's teaching us something. He's teaching us the summa milsi, that the fact that you say that there's interest, even though you actually haven't collected interest, you're in violation of the prohibition. This is also logical because it says in the Mishnah in Daf Ayin Hey, it says the Ilu over and below Sase. These are the ones who violate the prohibition of interest. The lender, the borrower, the witnesses, and the guarantor. Now, all of them have done an action. Why are the witnesses in violation? What prohibition did they violate? And the summa milsi, that they were involved in the imposition of the interest. And so therefore, since they were involved in that, Shmamina, we learn from here that that's where they're in violation. Amar Rav Safra, Kol Sheilu B'Dinei Motzi Milo V'Lamava. So Rav Safra says, anything which, according to the laws of the non-Jews around us, they would take it out from the borrower to the lender, B'Dineinu, but if it would be our laws, remember, Rabbi Yochanan says you don't collect the interest, but Rabbi Elazar says you do by a biblical law. So Rav Safra says anything that, according to their laws, they would take the money from the borrower to pay the lender, because they'd say, listen, you borrowed the money. But dinenu, if it would be our laws, our laws, we would return it from the lender to the borrower. But anything where they wouldn't collect the money, where they wouldn't take the money from the borrower to pay the lender, according to our laws, we wouldn't return the money. We wouldn't say it's biblical interest. So, is this really the case? Let's say you say I'm buying a say of wheat, and I'm lending you a say of wheat, and you have to pay me back a say of wheat, and the price could go up, and that would be interest. It's called rabbinic interest, the b'dinei and motzi, but the Gentiles would make you pay from the borrower lender, but our laws, we wouldn't make the lender pay the borrower, because we would say that's rabbinic interest, so we wouldn't return the money, even according to Rabbi Elazar. So he says, no, we don't view that. My statement was talking about interest. They view that not as interest, but as a deposit. So they make you pay, but not under the realm of interest. But let's say, basically, there's a collateral without reduction. What does this mean? This refers to you lend money for a vineyard, and the guy gives him the vineyard as a deposit or as a collateral, and the person who's holding the vineyard as the collateral is eating the grapes in the meantime, and he's not deducting from the debt. So that's a form of interest. The B'dineim Motziin, that according to their laws, we're going to make the borrower pay the lender. We're going to say under those circumstances, if the borrower is not letting the lender keep the fruit that he's eating, we're going to take it from him. But according to our laws, it's rabbinic interest, and we don't make the lender pay the borrower. They're going to say that the lender got it as a purchase, not as interest, and so therefore I didn't consider that the same thing. So what's Rav Safra teaching us? He's teaching us the following: anything which, according to their money, according to their laws, they take out from the borrower to the lender. We're going to return the money from the lender to the borrower. This is biblical law, biblical interest according to Rabbi Elazar. And that's what does it mean when he says according to their laws they don't pay it? and therefore we don't return it. That's ribis mukdemas, ribis milcheres. This is if you give them a gift in advance of the loan or after the loan, which we consider to be rabbinic interest, they wouldn't force you to do that, and so therefore we don't return the money. Okay, so stop here. Actually, the next piece is a little tricky, so we'll try to start with this piece on. I'll pick it up here, God willing, Wednesday morning at 6:30. All right, we'll stop the recording here.